The Galactic Empire had ruled the known stars for so long that it no longer remembered what fear felt like. Its fleets were ancient, massive, and ceremonially beautiful, vast wings of polished alloy gliding through space like monuments to inevitability. Entire civilizations surrendered at the sight of Imperial banners alone. Power, to the Empire, was not something to be tested. It was assumed. So when humanity arrived, no one took them seriously. Earth's ships were small by galactic standards. Angular. Boxy. Scarred even when new. Their hulls lacked decorative plating, their engines burned hot instead of clean, and their weapons were visibly mounted instead of hidden behind elegant casings. Imperial analysts laughed openly during first contact briefings. The consensus spread quickly through command networks and noble courts alike. This was a species that had reached the stars too early. Galactic media ridiculed human engineering. Commentators compared Earth's warships to cargo haulers with guns bolted on as an afterthought. Energy efficiency charts were circulated like jokes. Simulation projections showed Imperial cruisers vaporizing entire human squadrons in seconds. The Empire had faced hundreds of species before, and this one followed a familiar pattern: loud transmissions, bold claims, and fragile steel beneath it all. Humanity, for its part, did not protest the mockery. Their diplomats spoke carefully, formally, never raising their voices. They acknowledged the Empire's size, its history, its rightful influence over vast regions of space. Human fleets avoided Imperial patrol routes and rerouted civilian traffic to prevent incidents. When provoked by aggressive maneuvers, they disengaged instead of escalating. To Imperial observers, it looked like submission wrapped in politeness. That misreading became absolute certainty when the Empire finally saw Earth's defensive formations up close. Human ships clustered tightly, flying in utilitarian grids instead of elegant arcs. No grand flagships. No awe-inspiring carriers. Just dense formations of similar-looking vessels, each one bristling with kinetic barrels and heat-scarred armor. Imperial admirals dismissed them as inefficient and unimaginative. Against Imperial shield technology, kinetic weapons were considered archaic, wasteful, crude, and obsolete. Outdated doctrine, one high-ranking strategist concluded. They fight like a species still afraid of losing. The Empire mistook caution for fear, restraint for weakness, and silence for ignorance. Behind closed doors, Imperial planners spoke freely. Earth's expansion corridors overlapped valuable trade routes. Its independent colonies complicated long-standing Imperial claims. Allowing humanity to grow unchecked, even if it posed no military threat, was deemed inconvenient. The solution was simple: apply pressure early, demonstrate dominance, and fold this young civilization into the Imperial order before it became unpredictable. Publicly, the Empire continued to laugh. Imperial fleets performed exercises near human space, broadcasting them deliberately. Colossal ships unfolded weapons arrays larger than entire human cruisers. Energy signatures alone were enough to make smaller civilizations panic. Human ships withdrew every time, leaving the Empire unchallenged and smugly vindicated. What the Empire never asked was why humanity, a species that had survived its own brutal history of wars, extinction events, and near self-destruction, seemed so unconcerned with appearances. They never questioned why Earth's ships looked overbuilt instead of elegant. Why redundancy replaced refinement. Why human captains never bragged, never threatened, and never explained themselves. To the Empire, power was something you displayed. To humanity, power was something you kept quiet until it was needed. And so the galaxy accepted the Empire's narrative without resistance. Humanity was labeled technologically backward, strategically naive, and militarily irrelevant. A species that would either submit peacefully or collapse under its own limitations once confronted with real force. The laughter spread, unchecked and confident. No one noticed that while the Empire was watching Earth's ships, humanity was watching the Empire. And no one realized that the ships being mocked were never meant to impress anyone at all. The shift from mockery to coercion came quietly, disguised as policy. Imperial councils declared new stability zones along contested trade corridors, zones that just happened to cut through human expansion routes. Access fees were imposed. Inspections were mandated. Patrols lingered longer than necessary. Each move was legal by imperial standards, precise enough to appear reasonable, heavy enough to remind humanity who set the rules. Human merchants were the first to feel it. Cargo vessels were delayed for days under exhaustive scans. Crews were questioned, databanks copied, manifests challenged on technicalities no other species faced. Entire shipments were seized under revised regulations and rerouted to imperial ports for temporary custody. Complaints were filed. None were answered. Then came the colony of Aster Reach. It was a mining settlement on the edge of human space, young and lightly defended, valuable only for its resources and position. An imperial task force arrived without warning, transmitting a declaration of protective oversight. The colony's administrators were informed that imperial governance would ensure long-term security and economic efficiency. Resistance, they were told, would be unnecessary. When the colony protested, an escort frigate moved into position. The human ship was small, utilitarian, and outmatched. Its captain requested time to evacuate civilians. The request was denied. An imperial cruiser fired a single precision volley, tearing through the frigate's hull and leaving it drifting, broken but intact enough for every nearby sensor to record the moment. The message was unmistakable. Imperial media broadcast the footage within hours. Analysts praised the restraint of the Empire for disabling rather than annihilating the vessel. Commentators mocked the human captain for believing diplomacy still applied. The narrative solidified quickly. This was not an act of aggression, but a lesson. A demonstration meant to spare humanity from worse consequences later. Earth responded without spectacle. Human leadership issued a formal protest, meticulously worded and deliberately restrained. They cited treaty clauses, trade agreements, and shared security obligations. They demanded the release of detained crews, the return of seized assets, and the withdrawal of imperial forces from the colony. No threats were issued. No ultimatums followed. The Empire dismissed the message as symbolic posturing. Behind the scenes, imperial commanders debated whether to escalate further. Some advocated for a decisive strike to force compliance permanently. Others argued that pressure alone would be enough. Humanity had already shown it would not fight. Why waste resources on a species that folded so easily? What none of them understood was that Earth's restraint was not indecision. Human command channels were quiet, but not idle. Data from the destroyed frigate was analyzed down to the microsecond. Imperial weapon signatures, firing intervals, shield modulation patterns, everything was logged. Evacuation corridors were cleared. Civilian traffic rerouted. Assets repositioned far from public sensors. Then a single authorization moved through Earth's highest security tier. It was brief. It referenced no enemy by name. It contained no emotional language and no rhetoric. The order acknowledged that diplomatic resolution had been attempted and refused. It concluded with a contingency clause that had existed for decades, waiting for a moment it hoped would never come. Imperial intelligence never detected the shift. They were too focused on projecting dominance, too confident in the image they had crafted. To them, humanity was still calculating losses, still arguing internally, still afraid of the consequences of defiance. The Empire believed it was teaching a lesson. In reality, it had crossed the one line humanity did not debate, negotiate, or forgive. And once that line was crossed, there would be no warnings left to give. What followed was not panic or outrage, but focus. Systems long kept dormant were reviewed, crews reassigned without announcement, and schedules altered under innocuous pretexts. There were no speeches to rally the public, no declarations to stir fear. Humanity did not need to be convinced. History had already taught it what unchecked power eventually demanded. And this time, it answered. The Empire chose spectacle for its next move. A full battle group assembled near the seized colony, not to fight, but to be seen. Capital cruisers formed layered formations, shields flaring like ceremonial halos. Weapons arrays extended and retracted in rehearsed precision. Every broadcast channel carried the display. It was dominance rendered as theater, meant to crush doubt before it could form. Then space bent. At first, Imperial sensors flagged it as interference, gravitational noise, background distortion, nothing worthy of alarm. Seconds later, the distortion sharpened, folding inward as if reality itself had been gripped and twisted. Emergency recalibrations lagged behind the data. By the time alarms sounded, something was already arriving. A single human vessel emerged from the distortion without flare or fanfare. It did not glide. It arrived with mass and intent, a blunt shape forcing its way into normal space. Its hull was dark, layered, and asymmetrical, scarred by repairs that had never been polished away. External structures protruded where elegance would normally hide them. This was not a ship designed to impress or intimidate. It was designed to endure. Imperial targeting systems struggled to classify it. Its energy output exceeded that of a cruiser but did not match known battleship profiles. Shield signatures were inconsistent, present, then absent, then irrelevant. Armor density readings returned values that made no sense. The ship transmitted no identification, no threat, no explanation. It simply moved forward, engines burning with controlled violence. Imperial Command issued warnings out of habit rather than confidence. When those warnings went unanswered, protocol dictated escalation. A cruiser fired first, releasing a disciplined volley of energy fire meant to cripple, not destroy. The beams struck the human vessel cleanly. They did nothing. The impacts flared across the hull, dispersing against layers of armor that absorbed, bled off, and redirected the energy without visible damage. No shields collapsed because there were no shields to collapse. The ship did not alter course or speed. It did not even acknowledge the hit. Then it responded. There was no glow, no charging hum, no visual spectacle. A moment later, space between the human vessel and the nearest cruiser simply ceased to be empty. Kinetic lances crossed the distance at velocities that made interception impossible. They punched through Imperial shields as if they were theoretical, tore through hull plating, and exited in clouds of superheated debris. The cruiser split apart, its elegant form reduced to drifting wreckage in seconds. Panic rippled through Imperial command channels. More ships fired. More energy washed over the human hull, scarring armor but failing to slow it. The vessel returned fire methodically, each shot deliberate, each impact catastrophic. Relativistic projectiles shattered engines, collapsed command cores, and turned capital ships into expanding fields of wreckage. There was no wasted motion, no overkill, just efficiency applied with ruthless precision. Imperial formations broke as captains tried to maneuver, only to realize the human ship was already inside their optimal engagement ranges. Its weapons did not rely on sustained fire or overwhelming volume. Each strike was final. Each target neutralized with certainty. Sensors began to fail as debris clouds interfered with readings. Command cohesion dissolved. The battle group that had gathered to intimidate now fought to survive. And through it all, the human vessel remained silent. No taunts. No declarations of vengeance. Just steady advance, controlled fire, and the unmistakable message that this engagement was not a desperate gamble. It was an execution of doctrine refined long before the Empire ever noticed Earth. When the firing finally ceased, the remaining Imperial ships were retreating, damaged and disorganized, their confidence shattered along with their fleets. The human vessel did not pursue. It held position, scarred but functional, engines steady. Only then did Imperial analysts assign it a designation, drawn from fragmented human archives and incomplete translations. Destroyer. Too late, the Empire understood the mistake it had made, not in provoking humanity, but in believing that what it had seen before represented the limits of human war. In the aftermath, the galaxy tried to explain what it had witnessed. Imperial analysts replayed sensor data frame by frame, searching for hidden technologies or forbidden weapons that could justify the outcome. None of the usual answers fit. The human vessel had not broken known physical laws. It had simply exploited them without compromise. That realization was more unsettling than any superweapon. Human doctrine, long dismissed as primitive, began to surface through intercepted communications and fragmented archives. Where other civilizations pursued elegance, efficiency, and minimal mass, humanity had chosen endurance. Their ships were not built to avoid damage. They were built to function while taking it. Systems were layered, not optimized. Components were redundant, not refined. Where one failure would cripple an Imperial cruiser, 3 more systems waited behind it on a human hull. The destroyer embodied that philosophy completely. Its armor was not decorative plating but stacked composites designed to fracture, absorb, and redistribute force. Damage was expected, calculated, and planned for. Internal compartments were isolated so thoroughly that entire sections could be lost without compromising the ship's ability to fight. Power was routed through physical conduits rather than delicate energy channels, allowing manual control even under catastrophic conditions. Imperial engineers found this approach baffling. It wasted mass. It sacrificed speed. It ignored aesthetic symmetry entirely. But it explained everything they had seen. The destroyer did not rely on shields because shields failed. It did not depend on flawless systems because flawless systems never stayed flawless in real war. Its weapons told the same story. While the Empire invested in energy-based arsenals that dazzled sensors and impressed audiences, humanity trusted momentum. Kinetic weapons did not care about countermeasures or modulation frequencies. They carried force that could not be negotiated with or recalibrated against. Once fired, their outcome was inevitable. Humanity had learned early that physics was the only constant in combat, and it never betrayed those who respected it. Historical records revealed that destroyers were not new. They were legacy designs, conceived during humanity's most uncertain era, when extinction was not theoretical and survival depended on brutal honesty about limitations. These ships were never meant to patrol borders or intimidate rivals. They were contingency assets, reserved for scenarios where diplomacy had failed completely and retreat was no longer acceptable. They were kept hidden because they were not symbols of pride. They were reminders. Crew selection alone reflected that mindset. Destroyer crews trained for isolation, deprivation, and sustained combat without reinforcement. They rehearsed operating with partial power, missing compartments, and cascading failures as routine conditions rather than emergencies. Their doctrine assumed that help would not arrive, systems would break, and the enemy would not hesitate. Anything less was self-deception. When the destroyer finally transmitted a message, it was not aimed at the fleeing Imperial fleet, but at every listening system across the region. It was brief, informational, devoid of emotion. Humanity did not seek territory beyond its borders. It did not intend to challenge galactic order. But it would not allow its people to be used as leverage or its restraint to be mistaken for permission. The vessel they had encountered was not a flagship, not a prototype, and not humanity's strongest asset. It was simply the one authorized to respond. That final detail spread faster than the battle footage itself. The implication was unavoidable. If this ship represented restraint, not escalation, then humanity's true capacity remained unseen. The destroyer had not arrived to conquer or intimidate. It had arrived to end a problem with minimum necessary force, then withdraw. For the first time in generations, the Galactic Empire was forced to confront an unfamiliar truth. Some civilizations did not build for dominance. They built for survival. And those were the ones that endured when arrogance finally met reality. The retreat happened faster than anyone expected. Imperial ships disengaged without ceremony, broadcasting ceasefire codes across every available channel. Occupation orders were rescinded. Detained crews were released. Supply routes reopened. Within hours, the same authority that had dismissed humanity as irrelevant now treated every human transmission with procedural urgency. No apology was issued. None was needed. The message had already been delivered in the only language the Empire truly respected. Galactic networks flooded with analysis, speculation, and fear. Footage of the engagement replayed endlessly, stripped of commentary, because commentary no longer felt adequate. The laughter that had once followed images of human ships vanished overnight. In its place grew a careful silence, the kind that followed a miscalculation too large to deny. Other civilizations took note. Trade alliances quietly adjusted their policies around human space. Border patrols altered routes to avoid unnecessary contact. Diplomatic envoys requested meetings with an urgency that bordered on desperation. Humanity had not declared itself a power, yet the galaxy reorganized itself around that assumption anyway. The destroyer did not remain. Once Imperial forces had withdrawn and compliance was verified, the vessel powered down its weapons and departed as it had arrived, leaving no marker, no warning buoy, no lingering presence. Its exit was almost anticlimactic, a blunt reminder that its purpose had never been to occupy or intimidate. It had been sent to resolve a problem. The problem no longer existed. Earth's response to the sudden shift in galactic attitude was measured. No victory parades were held. No triumphant broadcasts filled civilian channels. The public was informed of events in controlled detail, framed not as conquest but as defense. The fallen frigate crew was honored quietly. Reconstruction teams returned to reclaimed colonies without escort fanfare. Life resumed, altered but intact. That restraint unsettled the Empire more than any threat could have. Imperial doctrine relied on displays of power to maintain order. Humanity's refusal to capitalize on its advantage undermined assumptions that had governed galactic politics for centuries. If a civilization could demonstrate overwhelming force and then choose not to exploit it, the usual hierarchies became unstable. Internally, imperial councils fractured. Some argued for immediate reconciliation, others for accelerated armament. None could agree on how many destroyers humanity possessed, or where they were stationed. Intelligence estimates varied wildly. The uncertainty itself became a strategic liability. Planning against a known enemy was possible. Planning against a quiet one was not. A new rule spread through the galaxy, unspoken but universally understood. Human space was not to be tested casually. Human restraint was not to be interpreted as weakness. And human ships, no matter how crude they appeared, were not to be mocked without consequence. Historians would later mark the encounter as a turning point, not because borders changed, but because perception did. The Empire had not lost territory or sovereignty. It had lost certainty. The belief that it alone defined the limits of force no longer held. Humanity never corrected the narratives that followed. Some called them saviors of balance. Others labeled them latent conquerors biding their time. Earth allowed both interpretations to exist. Ambiguity served its interests better than reassurance ever could. Those who feared humanity kept their distance. Those who respected it approached carefully. Both outcomes were acceptable. In the end, the lesson endured because it was simple. Humanity did not build its strength to dominate the galaxy. It built it to ensure that when lines were crossed, responses were decisive, finite, and final. It did not need admiration. It did not seek fear. It required only one thing: that when its ships were seen, they were taken seriously.